no proof is not in her.
All right, welcome to No Occasion to Shout. I'm joined as always with physicist Robin Kerner, and today we are going to be talking about Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends with the episode that I have linked. I'll have it linked in the description. And Robin, your first thoughts about after watching the characters?
So yes, I watched your 5 minutes on the characters. I have never seen the show. I've never even heard of the show. Never even heard the title of the show. My first thoughts are that this one will be how we're going to get our teeth into this is less obvious to me from The Last Airbender. Because that 5 minutes you did about the Imaginary Friends show, it's more descriptive of characters, less loaded with kind of philosophical assertions or life lessons. So, but I know we're going to find some interesting things, and let's go at it.
All right, so let's start out with my first one about Eduardo being scary and the whole insecurity, because I definitely saw that portrayal in the character description, because he is a very big, scary monster. However, he is scared,
Yes.
and often has very many existential crises. And even hearing just a small noise, he'll jump into another character's arms or run away. What's your take on that?
So I mean, I think this speaks to a psychological truth that I think is understood perhaps to the point of cliche, right? Which it's the people who are most aggressive, who portray themselves most aggressively in a way, most off-puttingly, that are working hardest to hide a weakness, right? If I intimidate you to keep you away, that's not because I am intimidating. It's because I'm intimidated by you if you come at me in an authentic, unmediated way. I think that's almost a cliche. I think people have a sense of it. That's the first thing that came to mind when I saw that character.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And it's something that is society. I don't, at least in my culture, I live in more traditionalist type culture, particularly in Dearborn. They're very like traditionalist Muslim. So anything off-putting like tattoos, face piercings, a skull, things like that are very triggering to them. And I think, I don't know how it is in England, in regards to people who look scary, how other people view them. Because when I usually view them, I view them as like, they need a hug. That's kind of how I look at people like that. Or just non-judgmental. I don't know their story. But definitely as we become more progressive in society, in part thanks to help to media and different portrayals of different characters, people are becoming a lot less, I think, judgmental towards people who may seem like they're...
I think small town America, where you've got a much more, let's say, homogenous, narrow range of culture, relative to, say, England, which is, I mean, in England, you've got 60 million people on a landmass the size of just Oregon, right? Just Oregon. So people are much more compact. It's much more kind of urban and urbane. Necessarily in a way across the country more metropolitan if you kind of netted it out. So I think there's a certain tolerance for different ways of displaying oneself, because you're necessarily in closer proximity to a wider range. And I think the broader point here is how folks are likely to react to someone who presents themselves in that way is indeed a function of the culture that you're in. Right, how broad that culture is, what the norms are, or indeed what the range of normal is, right? So and then that varies from community to community. It's different, for example, in the Democratic posts in America from in the Republican small town rural middle, say. So absolutely, that's the thing.
And what's the solution? Conformity or non-conformity?
Does it need a solution? Is it a problem?
I guess it isn't. Some people might say it is a problem. For example, if someone has there is a comedian who he has tattoos all around probably from his jawline down to his neck. Very, very evident. And he had this joke. I think it was a local comedian. I saw it on Facebook. But he had this joke. He said, I go to my local 7-Eleven a lot. I buy a lot of Mountain Dew. I buy so much Mountain Dew that they actually call me Mountain Dew Guy. Do you know how much Mountain Dew a guy like me has to drink in order to be called Mountain Dew Guy and not Tattoo Guy?
Awesome. I love that. That's brilliant. That's really brilliant. There is a thread in our culture that this is reminding me of, wherein there's an almost, what do I want to call it? There's this almost faux position that nobody should judge me on how I look, right? They should judge me by the content of my character and the things that I say and the things that I believe. And I think that's faux, because obviously how you look is how you choose to initially present yourself and interact with the world, right? Whether you go into a room smiling or not is the same thing. Whether you go into a room with a statement tattooed on your face that obviously overtly and explicitly distances yourself from maybe others in the room, given that you're operating in a certain culture with certain norms, it still sits in there. One has to always expect that how we are reacted to initially, and therefore set ourselves up for what happens next, the interaction that's going to happen next, is of course going to be a function of the only data that you initially get, which is how you look, right? So I've never been a big believer in this idea that, nobody should judge me because of what I'm wearing. I mean, what else are they going to go on? And what else are we going to do? I mean, obviously, we shouldn't judge people as morally lesser for any reason. But with that qualification, I think there's discussions of substance to be had around this. This isn't something you can wave away.
Yes, I definitely judge first and foremost by how people are dressed. I usually don't pay attention to things like glasses, tattoos, piercings, right, unless it's overtly obvious that they have. Because even I have a nose ring, and people can barely even see it. So is that how would you say when you look at someone? I kind of look at their attitude, if they're moving their hands, how extroverted they are. Extroversion and introversion is probably my first go-to, and then my second is clothes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think, the flip side of what I've just said is, I think it always serves us to, as individuals, to judge as little as possible and to get over any judgment we make, right? So when I say we have no right to expect that people won't judge us, that is not in any way at odds with saying it serves us all to judge people as little as possible based on how they look, whether that's tattoos, whether that's clothes, etc., etc. And yes, I think demeanor, I think the way we communicate is got to be the most important thing. And it's not always just in the direct things. It's not always in whether we're aggressive in our language. It can be in how we don't engage. Some of the people that I think I instinctively judge the most are those that almost avoid communication, or that aren't, that seem to not be honest with themselves about what they really want to say. And there's something of the not putting all your cards on the table out that I find difficult. I find unpleasant, I guess. Yeah, I mean, one thing that's coming to my mind now as I'm saying this is, about a year ago, I decided that I was going to try and seriously build my own personal brand for business purposes, the political persuasion, communication stuff that I do. And, one of the people in the space who's a friend of mine who I love is Jeffrey Tucker, whose trademark is his bow tie, right?
Yes.
And he, apart from that, he always dresses very well. He's obviously a man of good taste, good sartorial taste. But, and I have always not wanted to dress myself or certainly accessorize myself to say something, because I've always thought that's a failure of one's work or one's output speaking for you. However, I look at folks like Jeffrey Tucker, and he looks nice. It's nice to be in a room with that. And it is useful for marketing. And so I decided a few months ago I would dip my toe into this. And I started wearing my embroidered cotton shirt and my velvet jacket. I've got a couple of kind of velvet or velvet-like jackets. I always used to love velvet jackets as a student at Cambridge. It was a kind of a de facto trademark. So I started wearing them this last few months at all the conferences and conventions I'm doing. And it's amazing how people pick up on it. I mean, it really has helped me with the branding. People remember me by it. But of course, it's a completely superficial thing. I mean, it's kind of a superficial label. But it has value, it has impact, and for pure business purposes, I have to recognize that. And there's a sense in which, a face tattoo wouldn't be me, and obviously a velvet jacket kind of is. So
yeah,
it does do something of substance,
Yeah,
Imagine.
I think when I think people look at identity as important. No one wants to be completely generic.
Yes.
You have to have some sort of identity, but too much identity or too much of a personality is also a problem. I remember.
Sorry, I was going to ask you a question about that, but I didn't want you to interrupt. But when you finished what you were going to say, tell me why you chose to get the nose ring. I'm interested in that.
So when I was probably 15 or 16 years old, I was dating a girl, and she said, "You look really cute with a nose ring." And I said, "Would I look very cute with a nose ring?" And I said, "Maybe I should get a nose ring." And she said, "Maybe you should." And then it was kind of like a game of chicken at that point. So I got the nose ring, and I've got to say, if I would have gotten a lot of negative attention from it, I probably would have gotten rid of it. But I received a lot of positive attention from it. And a lot of people were like, "I like your nose ring, that's cool." And they would ask me about the nose ring, and I would kind of either explain that story to them, or I would kind of lie a little bit, because I honestly didn't even know why I got it. So sometimes I'd tell them, "Well, I'm in a band." And
so it's marketing too, right?
Yeah,
it's like velvet jacket.
it's somewhat like marketing, and I don't mind it. I didn't get it for a toxic reason. It's kind of a fun story. I think anytime anyone does anything, there's a story attached to it. And if it's a negative story, I feel like people grow out of it. And if it's not a negative story, it just ends up sticking with you throughout your entire career. And then you're a politician with a nose ring. But yeah, that's basically, it's not a very good reason, Robin. I'll tell you.
Actually, you know what? As you started that story, I was like, you know what? The answer to all of these things, if you're a guy, starts with a woman. I was just like, as soon as I was like, how did I not guess that?
I used to wear a Marvel tie, and I wore it to Students for Liberty. It's a really cool tie. It has, at first glance, you don't really notice that it has all the Marvel characters on it. You just notice like a color scheme.
Uh-huh.
And then as you get closer, you realize, oh, that's like a pattern, and all of them are Marvel characters. And I love Marvel. And my ex-girlfriend and one of my great friends now made it for me.
Oh,
so yeah, you might be right.
Awesome. Yes.
Do any of the other characters stick out to you in particular?
Well, I mean, I maybe because it was so obvious in a way, a character, and it was at the end of the 10 or however many there were. There was that rabbit who seemed to be dressed up like an English butler. Now, one of the things about what you said about that character made me think. Now, one of the things you said about that character was that he seems to be disdainful towards everyone. More, I'm paraphrasing, right? Even other rabbits.
Yes, well, there was an episode where there's a heartfelt moment with music playing. I'm making a violin. And it was just this heartfelt moment where there's subtitles and he's wiggling his nose and he's talking to these other rabbits, and the subtitles are saying like, because he went into the wild and now he's going back into the home. And he's like, I'll never forget the time I spent with you guys. I'll remember this moment forever. And they're like, we'll remember you too. We're sorry that you have to go. And he's like, is there anything that we could ever do for you? Or he's like, is there anything I could ever do for you? And the uncivilized rabbits, let's say, were like, well, it's actually kind of cold in the forest. Would you mind if we came into the house to live with you? And then he starts talking again, and he's like, what, are you mad? You savages, you think you can come into my house? And then he hops away. Which I thought was pretty
Okay, so that was a little bit different from where I was going. Okay. Yeah. All right. So
he's a very...
Go ahead.
Everything has to be in proper order. He's a very conscientious rabbit. Let's go with that. I think conscientiousness would be the word.
I mean, that there is something about the standard historic stereotype of the English butler about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that the thing that came to my mind when I watched it was, your commentary about him was the social class thing that we make a lot of hay about in England, in English dramas, which is that there's Downton Abbey. Have you seen Downton Abbey?
I have.
Okay, so you'll notice in there that the head butler, whose name I don't remember, is extremely loyal to his employers, right? So he is of, if you like, the working class, but he has greater loyalty to the upper class that whom he serves than to the people from his own class. And this is a thing. This is a thing that there's a certain kind of person or personality that seems to fit the butler role, a certain kind of service, where they get a lot out of being almost, I don't want to say, there's nothing childlike about it, but being the perfect employee, the perfect deliverer of service to their betters. And there's this sense that the greatest loyalty is to their betters. And it's very, in a class sense, and it's a very, very anachronistic. But when I was at Cambridge as a student, right, so I'm talking 18 to 22 years old, I remember sometimes at events being served by very old gentlemen who had been employed by the college for decades, who would treat me with such respect. And there I was, maybe a 20-year-old kid, and there would be the 70 or 80-year-old man, basically a servant of the college, treating me almost with that kind of reverence. And I felt this kind of classism there. And there's actually something very gentle about it. There's something very lovely about it, because it's still a form of kindness and generosity of spirit. But it's particularly focused up the social line, and it's I don't know if it is just an English thing, but you will see it in a lot of English social history and a lot of dramas that come out of England that capture that social history, and it's reminded of it. That's all. I don't know if it plays out in that character, who, as I say, seems dressed up like English butler, but
he's definitely extremely loyal to the person whom created him as the imaginary friend, which is Madame Foster. And when she says things that are against his quote unquote rules, or she wants to do something that is against her normal, what she would normally do, he gets very he's just like, yes, Madam Foster, of course, but he gets kind of weird about it because
So
it's not,
again, this is every stereotypical butler
yeah.
that's ever been in an English drama. That's really interesting historic drama.
Okay, so yeah, it's just a
Very
stereotypical,
conservative, extremely conservative.
yes,
That's what I'm trying to say. The,
extremely conservative.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's a conservatism, a most extreme kind that historically seem to always be with those at the top of the working class serving the upper class, at the very top, who were very comfortable in that role. Very interesting. Psychological.
I know that your story reminded me of one time I was at a Students for Liberty conference, and some people got sick, so they couldn't make this banquet that they were having. And I was an intern at the time, so they invited me, and they said, "Hey, do you want these spots?" They filled up. So I went there, and there was servants everywhere, and they were handing me like food of like, I don't know, caviar and like all that fancy stuff. And I remember looking at the servant and thinking, man, he probably gets paid more than I'm getting paid. Can I have his job? That's what I remember thinking. And I thought that was interesting because I'm like, I'm wondering what they are thinking about us, because I felt pretentious myself being
Yes.
there. I felt like I can go and walk and get my own food. Why is somebody serving me food?
Yeah.
This is strange. This is strange. I felt very strange.
I get that completely because I, there I was at Cambridge for 4 years, but on my grandfather, my father's side was a refugee, and my mother's side, a very poor, rural, countryside England, grow your own veg, no money, minimum wage jobs, that's where I come from. So when I go home and I'm with my family, it's very earthy, right? And so that was my roots, and there I am at Cambridge, and where everything has this kind of beauty and this kind of, obviously, and you somehow have some status because you got there, and it's
Yeah.
I had that feeling time after time, and I think if you come from, if you know your roots, this is why people say never forget your roots. So important. I think if you are rooted and you love where you come from, socially, economically, etc. You never take that being served too seriously. You never think that somebody is worth more respect because they have the bigger job or the status or whatever. It doesn't occur to you, and I guess that has some political implications. But I always had the fellow feeling with the servants. I always wanted to go, hey mate,
Yeah.
that I identified with them, I guess, more culturally, in terms of my upbringing.
Yeah,
So,
I would
yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, my family just barged in and came home, so they're being very loud right now. So I'm gonna have to cut this episode short and cut. Thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry I had to cut that episode short. I have 3 little brothers and sisters and an older brother, and they all came home, and it was just going to be too loud to record the episode. I wouldn't have been able to shut up my little siblings. They can't be quiet. So we wouldn't have been able to record the rest of that episode. And Robin and I are actually very busy. We really only have 1 or 2 hours every week to record something. That's one of the reasons I stopped No Occasion to Shout, is because we just really didn't have much time in our schedule, except for really late at night. But thank you for watching that episode. I hope you enjoyed Robin's interpretation. If you've ever, I know Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is actually a show that he had never seen, because he had heard of Rick and Morty, but he had never even seen Rick and Morty. He'd never even, I don't think he had ever even heard of Futurama. So Foster's Home, that's a show that must have been very, very foreign to him. I hope you enjoyed hearing his thoughts on that show. I know personally, my opinion, this show is not very well written, and plot wise, it's just not good. But I really enjoy the characters of that show. I think the characters are very well done, and that's mostly what I talked about in my video on High Time Cartoon. So thank you for continuing to watch No Occasion to Shout, even though we haven't been putting out that many episodes lately, but I'm trying to put out one at least once every week. And we will be doing that at least once every 2 weeks for sure, and trying to do once every 1 week, and also every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time zone, I have a new episode of High Time Cartoon. So thank you guys, and thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing.